order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Owens. Mr. Owens votes yes.
Mayor Stewart,
Here.
Councilmember Kovar,
Here.
Councilmember Dvala,
Present.
Councilmember Costick,
Here.
Councilmember Siemens,
Present.
Councilmember Smith
Muted.
is here, but muted, and Councilmember Searcy.
Here.
All right, thank you very much. Before we get into our meeting this evening, I just wanted to take a moment. A week ago, early in the morning, our community witnessed a horrific crime, and the lives of Mr. Williams and Mr. Johnson were taken at the hands of an off-duty Pentagon police officer. So I want to give the city manager an opportunity before we begin the meeting to update us on the latest regarding that case. But I think all of us just want to take a moment. And in particular, I want to thank Councilwoman Searcy for all that she's been doing for the members of our community since the incident happened in her ward. And I know there's a lot of people who are hurting now. And so I just want to thank her for all her work on this over the past week. And,
Thank you, Mayor. 1 week ago, in the early morning hours, a resident shot and killed 2 men in the parking lot of his condominium building in Tacoma Park. Excellent police investigative work led to an arrest and collection of evidence and documentation for a strong case. We mourn the lives lost, Dominique Williams and James Lionel Johnson, and send our sympathies to their families and to the survivor of the attack, Michael Thomas. The shooter, David Hall Dixon, was an off-duty Pentagon police officer. He's being held in the Montgomery County Detention Center and will not be out on bond. Through media coverage of the homicide, a video was released of an earlier incident on May 6, 2020, involving Dixon, showing him pointing a long gun at a woman in the condominium lobby. Police have now also charged Dixon for assault in that incident. Prior to the release by the media, the Tacoma Park Police had not seen the video. However, we have confirmed that the video was given to the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, where Dixon was employed. Both the May 2020 and recent cases are ongoing investigations. In addition, to ensure that Tacoma Park Police have handled both cases appropriately, a comprehensive review of the Tacoma Park Police Department's response is being done, including all aspects of the case, press releases, and follow-up. The review will identify how well or not all policies, procedures, or best practices were followed, and may provide recommendations on improvements for handling future incidents. These incidents are traumatic at any time, and there is so much pain right now nationwide. We send our sympathies to the families of the victims, the Tacoma Overlook community, and all for whom these incidents are particularly painful.
thank you. And again, I just want to say thank you to members of the community who have reached out and asked questions during this time. And, I'm glad to see that we're looking into the incidences, the one in particularly in May. And I know people still have a lot of questions, and we'll hopefully continue to have conversations about this. So I just want to say thank you. And again, my great thanks to Councilwoman Searcy and our staff who are particularly helping residents who are really impacted by this crime in that area. So thank you. All right. Moving along, tonight's meeting, the agenda has changed a bit. We forgot to put on the agenda that we have our youth council with us this evening. So I'm going to turn it over to Julia in a moment. Moving forward, we have next week on our agenda, Monday night, April 19th, is a budget work session that starts at 7:30. That's a work session on capital projects. On Wednesday, April 21st, we don't have a regular council meeting. That will be an administrative function session as the city council starts to consider applicants for the city manager position. Then on Monday, April 26th, again, we have budget work sessions. These will include operating budget and preliminary budget reconciliation. And then on Wednesday, April 28th, we have a public hearing on the constant yield tax rate and the FY 2022 budget. And Monday, May 3rd is our budget reconciliation night. And that's our upcoming. And we may add a couple of other things. I think the committees will probably be coming back. And we have that work session tonight, but we may have more of that scheduled. So before we get to our public hearing this evening, I want to turn it over to our representative from the Youth Council, Julia. There you are, Julia.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Julia Maynard from Ward 3 and also a part of the Youth Council. Thanks for giving me some time to discuss some of our updates. Recently, we have been meeting with a variety of different people over Zoom, and one of those people, are Chris Duffley from the Red Cross, who discussed potential youth initiatives that have had an importance during this pandemic. Some members of the Youth Council attended the National League of Cities Conference, which is an organization comprised of city, town, and village leaders that are focused on improving the quality of life for their current and future constituents. We also met with City Manager Suzanne Ludlow, who graciously gave her time to discuss the process of creating the city budget and how the pandemic has definitely created some obstacles. The members of the Youth Council thought the chat was extremely eye-opening because of how much the little things matter when coming up with a potential budget. And yeah, we're continuously working on some different projects, and we're excited to continue on throughout the rest of the year. Thank you guys so much.
Great. Thank you, Julia. Anyone have any questions for Julia? Not seeing any. Thank you again, and glad some of you got to go to the National League of Cities. So,
Thank you, guys.
thanks. Have a good evening. All right, next we'll move on to our public hearing on the recommended FY 2022 budget. And I think we had two people signed up for that, Arthur David Olson and David Navari. I don't see Mr. Navari, but I believe Arthur David Olson is with us. Is that correct?
He should be with us. He should be joining us momentarily,
Okay,
I hope. Here he comes.
great. It's all you, Arthur.
Oh, it's me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Arthur David Olson, Herbie Hancock Avenue on property tax bill. First, I hope the council will remember that people do not pay tax rates. They pay tax bills. The bills are determined by both tax rates and assessed values. The county has projected that total Tacoma Park property taxes will be unchanged if the tax rate is 52.95 cents. That's the constant yield rate. The proposed budget includes a tax rate of 55 cents. Since the proposed rate is 3.9% higher than the constant yield rate, total tax bills would go up by 3%. Increasing tax bills faster than people's ability to pay is unsustainable. The Employment Cost Index, the ECI, is a poor measure of increases in ability to pay. The COLA. For this year, the COLA is 1.3%. The budget proposes increasing tax bills at 3 times the rate of the COLA. Perhaps the best measure of increases in ability to pay is the city's own rent stabilization increase allowance. For this year, the allowance is 0.4%. The budget proposes increasing tax bills at 10 times the rate of rent stabilization. I've heard the argument that this large increase is needed because tax revenues have grown more slowly than spending. To me, that's an argument for reducing spending rather than for increasing taxes. Recognize that reducing spending means reducing programs. And I've heard the argument that now is the time for Montgomery County to give Tacoma Park relief from the county's freeze in tax duplication payments because federal pandemic aid makes it possible to do so. The city is also
Arthur, I think we lost you.
at one point.
You want to do the last part again? I think we lost you about 10 seconds, 10, 15 seconds.
Yes, the city, I hope the council will adopt tax rate. Is that where we got up? I hope the council will adopt a tax rate no higher than 53.64 cents. That's the constant yield plus federal COLA. Thank you. And I got in under the time limit even with interruption. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Arthur. Appreciate it. And I still
I
don't think is David Navari with us?
He is not on the meeting.
All right, so then that is it for our public hearing. We'll move on to general comments, and we have Paul Eubner.
Let me know when you're ready, Jesse.
Go for it. Start.
Okay, great. Paul Hubner, Ward 3. Even though State Highway has rejected the lay-by as unsafe, leaving the junction development plans in limbo, I remain concerned about the positions of some of our council members and especially city staff. One council member has expressed the idea that if we don't get this deal done with NDC, no developer will ever touch us again. There are many reasons to be troubled by such a statement. Does such a statement indicate that our elected officials have forgotten that their primary duty is to represent the wishes of city residents? Have both council and staff, though paid by residents' tax dollars, begun to identify more with the developer than with the needs of the residents? We have heard city staff, the mayor, and even council members testify before governmental agencies in support of the developer's needs and request variances and waivers of the regulations and codes they are sworn to uphold on planning, traffic, parking, public space, and even safety. The Purple Line is a prime example of how a too cozy public-private partnership with a developer might go wrong. The Purple Line contractor walked off a $5.6 billion contract, leaving Maryland state taxpayers holding the bag. This could easily happen with the Tacoma Junction's NDC development on a 99-year lease with no tenants, uncertain construction expenses, and untold environmental cleanup costs. What if NDC walks away, leaving the city to shoulder the costs? City staff has shown that they are too cozy with the development community. Monday night staff review ignored totally all of the negative safety reviews, and Mr. Washington, the developer, denied the existence of any safety problems at all. City staff were on the call and did nothing to correct the record. What else is staff not telling you? Put it in context. Just recently, the city manager tried to hide from council and the public the County Department of Transportation's takedown of the lay-by. Meanwhile, residents have been telling you all along that the lay-by is unsafe. Why have you not heard us? The moral of all this is that when regulators, officials, or employees working in the public trust become too familiar, cozy, and connected for-profit contractors to for-profit contractors and developers and identifying with them, then disaster can follow closely behind. With the Tacoma Junction Development Plan so far astray from the council's own resolutions, votes, and promises to city residents that it needs waivers and variances just to squeak through a development-happy planning board then something is rotten in Denmark and residents don't want to be left holding the bag. It's time to rethink this undertaking and create a development that meets the original needs and desires of the residents who own this parcel.
Thank you, Mr. Hubner. Thank you. I think the next person, Ms. Carpenter, is Catherine Rookra.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Hi, am I on? As far as
You're on, yep.
I'm sort of frazzled and rushing. We had a gas shortage at my Rockville location, so I kind of am dashing in and not feeling as prepared as I would like to be. But
All right, Ms. Rookra, do you want to? We have other folks. Do you want to?
it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm going. So anyway, I'm the owner of Spring Mill Bread Company, and I love Tacoma Park. Love that location, and I opened my location thinking that lot across the street was going to be available to my customers, which they use quite regularly. And just in light of some of my customers sharing some concerns with me about the 55 spots or about whatever that is that we are losing and what we're gaining, I think it's 55 spots. And just my concern is that with the new development and the new offices and the new retail, how that's going to affect the current businesses that the junction is, the new development is supposed to help the existing businesses at the junction. So, I just haven't had I went to the meeting 2 nights ago and didn't get a good grasp on how we're going to be able to utilize that parking. And I guess there was a question, was it going to be paid parking? Because, people paying at the meter aren't going to pay money and walk across the street for a $6 loaf of bread. I think just some clarification maybe for the community and the businesses that are existing in terms of how we're going to be able to benefit from the parking that is coming in the new development. And again, these are concerns that my customers have expressed with me, and I thought it prudent to sort of pay attention and, see how we're going to be able to benefit, as well as, it's going to be a hardship as we're, not going to have any parking forever along the development. And I do know, based on my experience in my Bethesda location, that does hurt your customer traffic. And, some customer patterns never come back, as we've experienced with the pandemic, how that's shifted a lot of buying patterns. And again, I wanted to write something down, so this is just kind of coming out of my mouth, so I hope it makes some sense, but just would like some clarification for the existing businesses as to how we can benefit from the new development as well. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Ms. Carpenter, I see David Navari has joined us.
Correct. Yes.
Mr. Navari, we're into public comments. We finished up the public hearing, but if you want to speak on both, you could do that now.
Unmute. No, my comments will be pretty short. I'm going to just comment on the budget. And first of all, I just wanted to say that it was super exciting to see the percentage columns in the budget. I know we worked on that discussed that for a couple of years. So that was awesome. And so I read about the $14.8 million windfall that the city's getting for PPP bailout. And I guess that has to be spent in the next like 2.5 years. And that's a large chunk of money, $7 million a year. That's 25% of the budget. And I'm sure you guys will come up with some good plan for that. But I did notice that in the draft budget, the city manager was proposing 1.9% tax rate increase. So if you look at Sycamore Avenue, we got an average of 5.6% increase with real estate appreciation, which the state, I know, did a very uneven job last time with the assessments on that. So our total tax increase is 7.56%, which is, if you divide by the 2.3% ECI rate, that's 3.2 times the ECI rate. So that is a pretty heavy and painful hit in the middle of the pandemic. I didn't have the time to look up. I don't know what the average assessment increase of all the city properties would be. I know it's not as high as Sycamore, but I just ask you to be very careful and with the tax increase during these hard times. I know, even though I'm in the side of the wards that have the more expensive houses and stuff, I took a pretty good hit with the just billable hours, and I talked to a lot of other people that did too. So if you could just help us and sharpen the pencil on that aspect, that would be great. I think that's all I have to say about that.
Great. Thank you very much. Next, I think we have Mr. Matthew Ling.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for taking my public comment. I guess I'd rather use it to ask a question of the council. I was wondering who is conducting the review? Because it sounds like we don't know yet. Is it okay for me to be asking these questions during my public comment?
Usually, sorry, Mr. Ling, usually during public comments,
All right. Well, then
we don't have a back and forth. So if you email us, we can, yeah.
That makes sense. Well, I'd just like to, I understand that the police department intends to perform an internal review, which is great, and I thank them for taking those preliminary steps, and I look forward to hearing how that progresses. But I definitely think that the council should ask for an external review as well. With all due respect to the police department, it appears to me that they failed to properly investigate this incident, and I'm sort of sorry to say this in such a sharp manner, but if we shouldn't have trusted them to investigate then I don't know why we should be expected to trust them now to investigate now. And this isn't just about the propriety of it all. You know, I'm confident they probably could run an exhaustive review, but it's also about the appearance of the propriety. And I think in order to restore some trust, there really should be an external investigation. I think we don't really need to look much further than the recent press releases that conclude that this is necessary. I think in the most recent Saturday press release by the police department, there were multiple incorrect, inaccurate statements that the police department really, being frankly, should have known were inaccurate when they made them. I think they stated that neither party wished to press charges, and frankly, we now know that the victim was unable to communicate with the responding officers due to a mental health episode. And if someone is not capable of pressing charges, then it is not accurate to say that they affirmatively decided against pressing charges. I think the press report or the press release also stated that no crime was committed. That's just not true. There were multiple crimes that were committed. I mean, there was tons of evidence to the responding police officers that crimes had been committed. I mean, pepper spray, the shooter Mr. Dixon had said that he used pepper spray, which is classified as a dangerous weapon under Maryland law. That alone would have merited investigation. And frankly, it's really simple to pull video from surveillance. This occurred inside the lobby of a common space of a condo. They know those areas are videotaped. It's very easy. You know, in all of my years working as a civil rights litigator, I routinely get this kind of evidence, you know, through discovery, through PIA, through FOIA requests. It's just part of the ordinary and standard police investigatory practice to make all reasonable efforts to obtain highly probative and relevant evidence. And there's a reason why we want video evidence. It's because we don't have to believe anyone's word, which is what they seem to do in this case. It's because everyone gets to see what happened with their own eyes. So I don't know the parameters of this investigation, whether it's going to be internal or external, but I really think that the council should take it upon themselves to call for an external review, either through resolution or through some other means. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, I think Miss Mary Jane Machui.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Miss Machui.
Thank you. Thank you. Last week, my son got a call on his cell phone and from a developer who wanted to buy our house. I am concerned. They knew his name. His name is not on the lease. He has autism. How in the heck do they know that personal information? And why are they pressuring him to buy our house? And I'm just really upset. These predatory developers are really gobbling up our neighborhood and putting pressure on people. And I really am angry about it. And also, I just wanted to say that some of the big buildings, developments that are being talked about or have been talked about in Tacoma, like Tacoma Junction and the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Department and the new library. We aren't consulted. People with disabilities like me and people and parents of special needs adults, as far as I know, we're not consulted. We have never been asked. The questionnaire, I filled out the questionnaire for the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Department. There was not one word about disabilities on that. Not one word, and there's a pretty lengthy questionnaire. Why? I filled it in, and there's a place you can do fill in the blanks or whatever, but you know, and then the mayor you have and Miss Ledlow and other people have come to our meetings, but then nothing, you listen and you thank you, but nothing is done. When is something going to be done? And I've spoken to both, I've gone to several of those meetings that's been going on for Tacoma Junction. You know, it's been going on for years. I've spoken to MDC officials, I've spoken to city officials, and both of them saying, oh, we're going to try to hire people with disabilities. Nothing now, all of a sudden, it's forgotten. We're forgotten again. Why are we being forgotten again? Please remember us, and we exist. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You too. Next up is Mr. Carter Doherty.
Hi. Is this working? Oh,
yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
okay. Sorry, I just heard it not. Thank you very much, Carter Doherty, Ward 1, 6 Crescent Place. You know, I wanted to start off by saying I hope we, you know, continue the inquiry into the murders of Dominique Williams and James Johnson. There's a crowdfunding effort going on for the funeral services of these two men, and I certainly hope that we in Tacoma Park can play our part for racial justice in a rigorous review of this and taking the appropriate steps afterwards. I'm not going to dwell on the details. It's also a reminder of how much we have to do that is not Tacoma Junction, and yet that's what I seem to have a minor career in, talking to you all about. Let me assure you that Tacoma Parkers still want you to do this and to look past the noisy minority that likes to convey the impression that the whole world is against this. They're not, and I went into that another time. I won't do it again. You know, lots of people were excited to hear about the new iteration and the meeting on Monday. Lots of people couldn't make it because it was scheduled during dinner times and bedtimes. And lots of people were ready to deliver this message to you tonight. But I told people not to bother, that I would speak up and make clear that we're going to continue to press the point here. To the point of the State Highway Administration's letter, loading and unloading laybys. This is a technical problem to be solved, not a dagger aimed at the heart of the development. You know, there have been lots of issues to work with. It's an iterative process. And we've solved a lot of problems to be solved, and we solved most of them, you know, to the point that I hope nobody missed Heisel McCoy's comment from the planning staff. He said the design that the NDC had developed meets the low scale, small town feel of all the recommendations of the overall plan for Montgomery County, enhances the pedestrian experience, bike access, transit access, all contribute to the project being successful. So we're close to the finish line. We should keep on moving. I'm not here to offer you a point-by-point critique of the SHA letter. My friend Neil and I have always maintained that we want to see the system function properly, not to become armchair experts in this. I want to let you know I have sent a public records request seeking more information about the role of Comptroller Fran Cho in decision making. His opposition to this project is well known. But the reminder that the point of all these agencies is to get to there to promote development, promote economic development, find a way of making things work. We've worked a long time on this, so let's make the push at the appropriate time and get over the finish.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Abigail Conrad.
Hi, thanks. I also wanted to comment on the cases with Mr. Dixon and share my concern about how they were handled. It seems like there were two issues, or two at least that I'm concerned about. One is the preferential treatment that he seems to have gotten as being an off-duty officer. The fact that the incident in May was not investigated, that he used a weapon against a woman, and there was no investigation as to whether that was actually warranted, whether what he said is actually what happened, is concerning. And it's really shocking that it took 2 days for him to be arrested after he killed 2 people for, at off duty. It's really hard to imagine that the course of events would have been the same if he was not a police officer in another jurisdiction. And the other piece is, it's really concerning that it seems like the police had fairly little regard for the woman who was assaulted in May. She was in an extremely vulnerable position as a Black woman who's unhoused and going through a mental crisis. There are so many layers of vulnerability and potential stigma against her, that to just take the word of someone who attacked her that it was justified and that she was doing something that he should have, instead of calling the police, instead of calling for her to get help, is really concerning. And I would hope that as part of this investigation that the police will also look at, how they interact with people that are in really vulnerable situations, and making sure that there's that extra duty of care to make sure that they are not, privileging the position and experiences and, of other people that have more power and less stigma than they do. It sounds like the police did take her to the hospital, which is good, but I don't know what kind of follow-up happened with her. And just to, have that as part of the investigation. I think it's not just how they dealt with the officer, but also how they treated the victim in that case. And also for the review, I hope that there's attention paid to the policies and procedures and processes of the police department. I think sometimes when incidents like this happen with the police, there is an over focus on individual police officers and their conduct, when often the cause of the issue is something more structural. And it's not necessarily that an individual officer should be, fired or whatever. And it's really that retraining needs to be done, or policies need to be reviewed. And we've seen that with the Pentagon police force, that they've had to stand down for their entire police force and are retraining them on the use of force. And I hope those types of remedies will be looked at as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Conrad. I am not seeing any of the other folks who signed up this evening. So Ms. Carpenter, is that correct?
That's correct. No one else has joined.
We'll go to council comments. Any council comments this evening? Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I just like to make a comment regarding the recent police violence here in Tacoma Park. And I really appreciate the people coming tonight and expressing their concerns. As some of you may know, I've been on this council since 1999, and throughout my years on the council, this type of issue has been a concern with me, of how some of our police have interacted with members of the public. And I have to say that I'm really glad to see the interest from the community in this particular incident. It's an interest that I've been very frustrated that we haven't seen from the community for many years, when I'm not saying I've done a great job, but I've tried to lay some facts out in front of the community through the use of my bully pulpit, and also from, pushing some of the local media when we really had local media to put some of this information out in front of the public. And I can say I haven't seen much interest in dealing with this issue from the community or from previous councils. But I do want to say that I have seen significant change in this and kind of a growing interest in it. And I can just about tell you when it started was when Mayor Stewart became the mayor here in Tacoma Park. And we have some new faces on the council. And this has been something that that the council has started to deal with. And Suzanne Ludlow became the city manager. And I think we've really been making some progress. And that's not to say that there isn't more progress to make, but I just want to put things in perspective when we're talking about this. One of the most significant changes that the council has made is to hire a police chief who has the understanding of the concerns. He has the heart in the right place and has been taking enormous strides in changing the character of our police department, changing personnel when necessary, and providing, reviewing the various processes and procedures within the police department. He's been developing a educational plan, which really helps to recraft the police here in Tacoma Park. And he's been, his heart's just in the right place. And so I don't want us to, in our exuberance to solve this problem that's been laying in front of us for so long, that we throw out the progress that we have made. I will say that I do agree that there should be a complete review of the situations involved. I don't know enough about either of the two incidents that happened, and I'm certainly not going to talk about anything I do know, given that it's a ongoing judicial matter. But I guess I would like to say that the one thing that I have done through these years is I've learned. There's been a lot of self-development in this too, because I started out with my opinions of what was going on and what wasn't going on, and I've learned through this that I have to admit to you that and my own personal racial bias has developed or waned is probably a better word through this time. But I've learned in dealing with my constituents that we all kind of want the same thing. We want our kids to grow up in a nice, safe community. We want our kids to have the opportunity to learn, and we want them to be treated fairly by the community. I didn't grow up in a racially diverse community, but I'm represented a racially diverse neighborhood, and I've learned so much about how we are just people, and it's not about the color of the skin. But the other thing I learned, which I think is important, is that I hear a lot of people who are talking about the police like it is one body and a group of people that are all doing the same thing. And it's far from that. I think we all know that in our heart, but yet when we talk about, the police doing these things, it isn't. It's some of what I've learned about the problems in the police department come from from officers within the department who are just as concerned about some of the community members with what goes on. So we're making progress. I just ask people to continue to press for answers, but at the same time, realize we're talking about people, and that's on both sides of the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Searcy.
Great. Good evening, everyone. And I just want to ask if folks could indulge me for a second, if we could just take a quick moment of silence for the two young men who lost their lives. Dominique Williams, 32, and James Lionel Johnson, who's 38. So if we could please just take a quick moment to reflect on that, that'd be great. Thank you. Thank you all. You know, my sincere condolences go out to the families of those two young men. And as Councilmember Seaman said, you know, I appreciate the swift action by our police department. But as with any incident or with anything that happens, there are lessons to be learned. So I know it's felt as if this has all happened over the course. This has been the longest week, perhaps, of quarantine for me. Between what has transpired and the number of actions that needed to be taken, and really trying to work to repair the hurt that our community is experiencing right now. You know, the mayor and I had an opportunity to speak with 92 residents from the Tacoma Overlook, 92. So that just lets you know how wide felt this incident is, how complex this issue is, and how much we have to work as a community to rebuild, not only as it relates to any kind of structural changes and things, because I know everyone wants to jump to the police point. And quite frankly, in my mind, changing process is easy. Changing hearts is difficult, right? So definitely want to send out my sincere appreciation to the folks that helped out, Grace Wiggins, police department that presented to the residents at the Tacoma Overlook. We are committed. We said it last night. I will say it again. I will be saying it. We are committed to being a resource for the residents in that building, from providing any kinds of mediated discussions to help cope, to providing additional technical assistance that you all might need. We're here for you, and I cannot stress that enough. So I want to make sure that that point is clear. We also had an opportunity before this call to speak to residents in the New Hampshire Gardens community about what transpired. And again, we are here, and it will take time for us. Again, we're talking about the making changes, and I know everyone wants to jump into the police thing, but this incident, whether we realize it or not, is deeper than that, and it hit people in different ways. And so what can we do as a community when we are thinking about public safety, when we're thinking about how we engage with our neighbors, how we engage with others in our community? Those are some of the conversations we need to start having, right? So again, for the residents in the New Hampshire Gardens community, we are here and definitely open to having additional conversations. I know that there were comments tonight, and I appreciate the comments that everyone has made tonight. I just want to make folks aware, the mayor and I, we have been on a round robin, Mayor, for the last few days. But we also had an opportunity yesterday to speak to the Public Safety Task Force about the incident that transpired. So the Public Safety Task Force is also making sure that they're taking this incident along with a bunch of other data and information that's being made available to them into consideration. So I want folks to be aware of that. If you have concerns about this incident or about anything related to public safety, we have, and you want that information to go to the task force. Now on the Public Safety Task Force page, there is a kind of public comment feedback feature. It's just an area where you can, it looks like a survey, but you know, the rest is optional. You can put your comment in and that comment will go to the Public Safety Task Force. I also want to say that there are, I know that there were some folks that were questioning changes to the task force scheduling. I want to remind everyone that the task force dictates what the task force wants and needs. So I just ask for everyone's flexibility as the task force may realize that they need additional meetings or they want to host different things, that our schedule may fluctuate a little bit. But one of the things that the task force specifically requested are opportunities to engage with the community. So in addition to the web presence that's on the page that you can give comments on, there is a plan for 2 community meetings. One will be on April the 29th, and I'm looking at the city manager, please hold me, because I tried to check these dates. And the other is tentatively scheduled for May the 24th.
Yeah, that's the one I don't know, but
yeah, I looked it up. I made sure to look it up. So there are going to be meetings where you, the community, will have an opportunity to engage with the task force directly. So I just want to make folks aware of that. And so changing to a bit of a lighter note, this weekend, I had the opportunity to participate in the Fitness Expo. And I learned how to double dutch. So I want to thank the rec department. You all don't know how difficult double dutching for me has been. My sister was an awesome, and still an awesome double dutcher. And she picked at me for years because I could not do it, okay? And we had some awesome people there who walked me through double dutching. It's on tape somewhere, but I was actually able to stay in the rope. So I am so grateful for the rec department for putting on such an awesome event. It was great to see so many kids out enjoying and socially distancing, of course, but enjoying just being outside. You just don't know how happy they all were to just be outside together, so to speak. So it was a wonderful opportunity, and many thanks to the rec department for putting that on. On Sunday, I had the pleasure of receiving my second vaccination dose, thanks to CCI. So I just want to give a huge shout out to CCI. They were hosting their second dose vaccination clinic. They focus more on their patient population, which are typically their health center in Ward 6. And so typically folks who otherwise would have a challenge, who may be, you know, in careers that would require them to be frontline workers, but would have difficulty accessing lots of Spanish speaking people. And so it was such a pleasant experience. Thank you to the deputy city manager, Jessica Clark, Jose Luis, all of the CCI staff. Doris Durante was out there again helping with traffic, and it was masterful how well it went. So I just want to send my sincere appreciation to them, and definitely hope that if there's anything that I can personally do or help to coordinate to have additional vaccinations happen, happy to do it. It was such a pleasure. They made it fun for people who otherwise would have been a little nervous, and I'm just very, very grateful to them. So thank you, CCI. And then last but not least, today was the farmers market kickoff. So thank you so much, the mayor, Councilmember Costick, for being there, and we were ringing in the bells. Oh, and there was a full star-studded event. Everyone from county council members, there were delegates, state senators. This is a lot of folks there. And so it was very, very fun. I just want to remind folks that the farmers market is on Wednesdays at Ann Street, and it starts at 10:30. So come early to get the good stuff. And Brazilian Bakery was there. I know the manager. Yes, I got 2 churros. So if you are interested,
The churros are awesome.
the churros are so delicious. So if you are interested in not only getting some fresh fruits and vegetables, but also some delicious baked goods, check out the farmers market. That's all I have. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Councilwoman Searcy. And I'm sorry you didn't tell us about that double dutch video. We could have kicked off our meeting on that. Great. Councilman DeBala.
Thank you. So first, what Councilmember Siemens and Cersei said about the recent events and the police work and the police and the review of the police, what they said. I'm not going to repeat that, but I support what they've had to offer on that. I picked up my CSA from the Crossroads today. And on the double, so for those who haven't signed up, you can do that, and you get your weekly bundle of vegetables and fruits, and that's just great. I also have had the pleasure a few years ago of the double dutch experience with the rec department, and it is fun. I want to just briefly say that there will be 3 community meetings in Ward 2 in the next week or so. This Thursday, tomorrow night, Long Branch Sligo Neighborhood Association to talk about city issues, budget and other. Next Tuesday in the Forest Park neighborhood at 8 o'clock. And then Thursday, the traditional Saska neighborhood north of East-West Highway, south of the creek. Designed so you can talk with your neighbors as well as with me about city issues. But if there's one that doesn't work for you and you need to hop to another, just let me know. Their registration, the Zoom registration, just contact me if you haven't gotten a link through a listserv or through my weekly newsletter. So I wanted to point that out. And I wanted to also say that last week was the Water Now Alliance annual meeting. Water Now Alliance is affiliated with the National League of Cities, and it's an opportunity for municipalities nationwide to talk about water issues, including stormwater funding, with federal officials from the new administration and from Congress. And I got a lot out of it. And again, anybody wants to hear more, just get in touch with me. So that's it for me this week. Thank you very much.
Great. Councilmember Smith.
First, I'd like to begin by thanking the Deputy City Manager, Safeway, Delegate Lord Jerkudian and Washington Adventist University for all coming together to allow and organize and bring forward a pop-up vaccine site in Ward 5 on Sunday. Almost 1,000 residents and people that live nearby had a chance to get the first dose of the Pfizer vaccine. I hope we can do this again soon. This was an awesome opportunity. I would like to also extend my thanks to the Director of Public Works, Daryl Braithwaite, for coming out yesterday evening to talk to Garland Avenue residents about their basements flooding. Part of the problem is the green space between the homes in Garland and the houses on Greenwood. That green space is owned by the university, so we are looking at trying to figure out a way to resolve this issue. It's been going on for a long time, and with climate change, it has only gotten worse. And then finally, a bit of history is being made on the floor of the Judiciary Committee. They are taking up HR 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparations Proposals for African Americans Act. This is the first time that this piece of legislation has ever been heard in committee. This would be an incredible piece of legislation if it is passed by the House, eventually becomes law. It was first brought forward by the former Congressman, late Congressman John Conyers in 1989. In all that time, it has never received a vote at a Judiciary Committee, and Congressman Conyers actually chaired that committee for many, many years. So I'm proud, I'm excited. This is a fantastic opportunity for Black folks in America. Thank you.
Any other council comments this evening? Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor. A few things that I just wanted to mention. One, first of all, I share my colleagues' concerns about the horrific shooting and all the added aspects of that story that have come to light, and certainly hearing about an incident in which people are evidently shot when they're not a threat to someone seems like exactly the kind of thing that we need to try to address in our own work, being led now by the task force. So I was very pleased to hear from Councilmember Searcy that the task force is looking closely at the recent incidents and trying to figure out how they fit in with their own work, and certainly looking forward to hearing that. And I think also really having a comprehensive look at what happened both in the recent incident and the earlier one is vital. And I'll just mention as part of that, this is a minor point, but I just want to make sure that it also is looked at. An important aspect of these kinds of cases is communication, how the community hears about incidents of this sort and what they hear. And when it comes to the press conference that was held, and I was there and many of my colleagues were there about a day and a half after the shooting, one of the things that some people said was they had a difficulty being able to find the live streaming of the press conference. And I understand in the context of everything else, that probably seems like a small point, but I think one of the reasons to have the press conferences is because we do want to share information. So I just encourage, as part of the look at this, at the processes that are involved, that we also try to standardize that in a way that can ensure that the widest array of people in the community who are interested can easily get access to it. So I'll leave it at that. And then a couple of other unrelated points. I was pleased to be able to participate on Saturday with the old Tacoma Business Association led cleanup in the Old Town area. People were able to meet at 3 different spots. One was in DC. I was with my wife Paula. We met at the Roscoe statue and cleaned up down in that area for an hour or so. And 2 things I'll say is, the unfortunate part is once you do that for an hour, then you find you can no longer not notice litter when you're walking around, and find yourself, maybe we should be doing it anyway, picking it up all the time. But the second thing is, a huge percentage of it is actually the remains of cigarettes. I can barely see them. It's hard to bend over and get them, but there's a ton of that outside some of the stores. And so I don't expect an answer now, but I'd love to know later on if we have any ability in some of our public areas like sidewalks and so on to ban smoking. And then I do want to also mention I'll be hosting a couple of meetings. This is similar to what Councilmember Dubala recently said next week on Tuesday, the 20th, and starting at 7:30. And I've sent out this information. If people in Ward 1 don't have it, they can contact me on the budget, the school year 2022 budget. And then there's another one on Saturday, the 24th, from 1 to 3, trying to do one that's not in the evening when people are getting home, dealing with dinner and kids and so on. And again, I've sent that information out. If you don't have it, contact me, but that's 2 discussions about the budget. And then lastly, this Saturday, again, is going to be one of the food distribution events at the Tacoma Park Elementary School, led by the Zion Ministries, as they've done every other week for quite a while now. And that's starting at 7:30 in the morning on Saturday. You can come a little bit later, at least 2 hours. If you can do at least 2 hours, it's worth coming. And I try to be there this Saturday, getting my second shot on Friday. So I'll have to see how into lifting 50-pound bags of potatoes I'll be that morning, but I hope to be there. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Not seeing any other hands. A couple of items tonight. Just also, so many things were said. Crossroads was awesome today. I'm glad we had the opportunity to go. And I do want to just reiterate the thanks for our Deputy City Manager, Jessica Clark, and our State Delegate, Laura Charkoudian. I mean, I think we have to say it's remarkable that this weekend on Sunday alone, we helped vaccinate nearly 2,000 people. And that was usually done because of our Deputy City Manager. And just to underscore how quickly she got into action is that I got the text from Delegate Charkoudian on Wednesday afternoon to say Safeway was looking for a location and could we help because they had extra vaccines. And she got right on it. And by Friday morning, they were doing a site tour of the parking lot and had it all set up. And I was able to volunteer for a bit on Sunday, and it went really, really well. So just thank you. And I'm glad to hear that the traffic problems went much better the second time, CC. I know if Doris doesn't call me in the morning, things must be going well. So I'm glad it went well. Couple of other things today. As folks I think know, I sit on the vice chair of the COG, Council of Governments board, and today was a historic day. We passed a resolution on DC statehood and had the opportunity to hear from Mayor Bowser, Congressman Connolly, and our Senator Chris Van Hollen speak to this today. And so that was great that we passed that, and hopefully we will see it move forward. In addition, today I was named chair of a task force to develop regional racial equity training for local elected officials. The COG is continuing to work on their racial equity work and building on the Government Alliance for Racial Equity work they did last year. They want to now provide and offer racial equity training for elected officials in the region. And so I'm going to be working with the Chief Equity Officers Group, which I actually think our Deputy City Manager is also part of that group, to figure out trainings. So I'm glad to do that as well. And I think everyone noted things before, but I think it's appropriate to close where we began, which is to thank everyone in the community and who has been working through this really difficult time. And I think it's just really important that, as Councilwoman Searcy said, that we keep in our hearts the families of Mr. Williams and Mr. Johnson, as well as Mr. Thomas, who was there. And as they go through this difficult time, and to hold everyone in our community and realize that our whole community is going through this difficult time. So again, thank you. And we will now move on to our work session. This evening, we actually just have one. Yeah. Oh, Cindy, I'm sorry.
Got a couple other things. Sorry.
I know. I knew I was going to do that. My agenda changed so much in the last like 2 hours. So, yep, you're up.
Thank you. Just a first quick note about COVID-19 vaccinations. We are trying to get more in the community, but there are many ways to sign up. And so please get vaccinated. I know that there's a pause in the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. There's still many appointments for the other 2 vaccines that are available. And I just want to give a shout out to the scientists and the public health officials who are doing this really carefully. It gives us some extra feelings, I think, that that people are looking out for us. We do know what the coronavirus can do, so please get your vaccines. The vaccine test, the COVID-19 testing in Tacoma Park will not happen this Saturday. They don't have enough staff. So there are other locations for COVID testing if you need that. People are still getting sick. We still have city staff who are in quarantine because of somebody getting sick. So, this is one of these things we have to keep monitoring. Please do check our COVID-19 dashboard, which we keep up to date, and it gives a lot of good information. One of the primary things I'd like to talk about is municipal tax duplication, and it's particularly important as we are thinking about the tax rate and taxes in Tacoma Park. We learned yesterday that the county executive proposes to only rebate 60% of the road maintenance component of tax duplication in Montgomery County, which is the main category, and it affects all 20 municipalities that are in the program. Apparently there was communication from the county executive to the county council president as of March 11th, which was not shared with the chapter, the Maryland Municipal League Montgomery County chapter, that provides a lot of the specification for the components that are being put forward for formulas for the tax duplication program. As with all tax duplication funds, the county collects property tax from municipal property owners for some services that it doesn't provide, and then the county is supposed to refund those amounts to the appropriate municipality. The Montgomery County municipalities believed they had an agreement with the county executive to rebate the full amount of the transportation formula, as well as the formulas for police, crossing guards, and park maintenance. The transportation formula, which is the per mile cost of county road maintenance applied to the number of miles of roadway in each municipality, is accurate and it's easily calculable. It's been agreed upon by all the various parties that it's an appropriate way to determine the amount of money that should be spent, that the county should rebate for, that would adequately identify the amount that the county would spend if they were responsible for the municipal roads. But what was not agreed to was the idea that municipalities would only receive 60% of that amount. Imagine being overcharged by a store, and then when demanding a refund, being told it's the store's policy to only refund 60% of the overpayment. Imagine a municipality only repaving 3/5 of the width of a road, or only paying its paving contractors 3/5 of their invoice amount, or only paying a public works employee just 3/5 of their paycheck. This is not right. It is not what we agreed to. The Montgomery County chapter of the Maryland Municipal League is preparing a response to the county executive's proposal and is urging the county council to vote to pay the full tax duplication amount. That would mean adding $5.2 million to the just under $9 million that is proposed to be rebated to the 20 municipalities eligible for payments. For Tacoma Park, it would mean an additional $468,000. Let's put that in context. That's 1.8 cents on the tax rate, just for that difference. We still would have to have negotiations for a fair police rebate formula, and those new amounts would apply to FY23. So we want you to contact the county executive and the county council to demand that the county pay the full amount of tax duplication money this year and every year. We will have a list of names and contact information up on the tax duplication page of our website. It's not up there yet, just because this is late breaking information. But truly, part of the reason that I am requesting a tax rate increase in the proposed FY22 budget is because municipal tax duplication has been frozen, and the cost of the money that is being paid to the county is not coming back. And that's a real burden on the taxpayers of Tacoma Park. So please contact the county council, contact the county executive, and say, do the right thing and pay the full amount. I also have in my city manager comments a review about a few paragraphs on the Tacoma Junction redevelopment project review being paused. On Monday evening, we had quite an extensive series of presentations and breakout rooms to discuss the project. There's wonderful materials on the website, city website, for that evening. If you didn't participate or didn't watch it, it's online, and you can have a link to that video. The city's development partner, Neighborhood Development Company, is having its engineers reviewing the comments by State Highway to address the elements in that letter. While we postponed review right now of the project, as soon as we do hear back what the options may be, that may come then for requests for continued review by the city council. So we have a lot of materials online, happy to have you look, and we'll keep you posted as we hear back from what the options may be. Got some good news kind of from the rec department. One of the things I'd like people to share, I don't think the word has gotten out very well. Our before and after care program is open. We only have a few children enrolled at the moment. Please take advantage of it. The rec department is trained. They have safety protocols in place, and they want to see your kids. If you've had any financial negative impact from the pandemic, the care is free. Similarly, for the summer camps, the care is free. When you fill out the registration, there's a box that says I was negatively affected by the pandemic financially. There's not an extensive proof of that. You just check the box, and that service, those camps will be free. We want to make sure that the kids are back in our programs, that the families can get back to work, and that we start to get to some normalcy. We are anticipating that the funds for that will be reimbursed from the federal funds. And that seems clearly covered by the guidance that originally came with the American Rescue Plan Act information. So we want to see your kids there. We want to see some outdoor activity. As Councilmember Searcy said, the kids enjoy it when they're out playing. And so we need to get that going. And I just do note that every indication is that the Fitness Expo was a success, and I have to see the Double Dutch video. So let's get that out. Do you have any questions for me today?
No.
Thank you, and we will get out some more information on the tax duplication so that your constituents can share their concerns. I want to also mention, I know a couple people have made comments about the city getting this $14.8 million through the federal funds. One of the very specific provisions is that the tax rate cannot be lowered by use of those funds. It's a very specific, important component. So part of the things as we go through and we will identify how we handle things, those funds cannot be used to lower the property tax rate. So please share that with your constituents so that they do understand why we've kind of identified that separately within the proposed budget. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Nice. Now we're going on to the work session. Sorry about that. It's been a really long week. All right. So tonight we have one work session. It's our continued discussion of committees. So I have the great honor of turning this meeting over now to my colleagues, Councilman Searcy, Caustic, and Dabala, to go through and where we are on that.
I think that Councilmember Cersei has the slides and that Councilmember Costick is kicking us off. It's been a bit of a week for all of us, but we do have pictures for you. Just give us a moment.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Oh yeah, thanks.
Perfect.
Great. So everyone, we are looping back on the topic of council appointed committees, and we don't really have a lot of new content tonight, kind of reviewing what we talked about last week and hoping to kind of get some more information from you all and a sense of where we're going with these quasi-judicial committees that we've been talking about. So Councilmember Cersei, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So for tonight, we are going to recap the general purposes of standing committees, recap the revised factors that we talked about before, review again the recommendations for the quasi-judicial committees, remembering that we are going to address the other committees in the future, separate from tonight, and then again, introduce the rest of those standing committees, time permitting. So just again, the core charge that we have defined for standing committees, boards, and commissions is to provide the council with tangible recommendations in key priority areas or fulfill the city's regulatory functions and requirements, to leverage residents' technical expertise and lived experiences, to ensure that the council has regular and timely information to use, and to create an opportunity to engage residents on issues that are important to them, as well as to enable residents to assist in community education and outreach activities in their priority areas as well. Next slide, thank you. And then we talked about our factors for kind of considering each of these committees as we go through. So again, those were whether the work supports the council's priorities or a continuing city structural purpose, whether the issue would be well addressed by a standing committee or some other structure, whether there's ongoing attention needed to the issue, whether there's staff capacity to support the committee, and then whether or not there's a need for technical expertise or lived experience, whether the issue is relevant and important to the residents, and whether an existing entity can do the work in this particular case where we're looking at some of the existing committees. And just again, the current quasi-judicial committees, boards, and commissions that we have are the Board of Elections, COLTA, the Ethics Commission, the Facade Advisory Board, the Noise Control Board, the Personnel Appeals Board, the Police Pension Board, and the Tree Commission. And what our small group did, Councilmember Cersei, Councilmember Dabala, and I, was to review these quasi-judicial committees against those factors I just went through, to consult with staff and individual members of the committees to find out more about what they felt was working and what was not working and what needed to be improved or changed. And then to consider structural issues across all committees as well. And I believe I am turning it over to Councilmember Dabala, maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So of the 8, we have, as you may recall from last week, split them into 2 buckets. The first 5, we recommend to retain the committee, retain essentially the purpose they're already charged with under code, reappoint anyone who wants to be reappointed, appoint new members at the end of June, and work with them on some specific issues that I'll go through with you in just a moment on the next slide. And then later, after I talk about the first 5, Councilmember Cersei will talk about the last 3, where we thought there were specific issues to explore and they needed individual board specific next steps, not to be just retained and updated. Next slide, please. So what we're hoping to get agreement from tonight from all of you is to, for these 5, to retain the purpose, as I said, make some structural changes, and ask the city attorney to go through the code for these 5 and make changes so that we can vote on them formally when the code changes are ready. So for the Board of Elections, manages city elections, we all know that. We all love them. And we want to hear their suggested code changes at a future date, and talk with them about whether revising their bylaws makes sense. For the Committee on Landlord Tenant Affairs, they hear cases, they advise on rental issues. The issue we want to talk to them about post-appointment is to consider the role that they might have in advising residents and educating residents on COLTA. There's a structural issue about non-resident landlords that we would like their advice on as well, because right now that's allowed. And if we go with a common structure, one of the recommendations of the group, that the working group last summer, was that as much as possible have residents be on resident committees. So for the Ethics Commission, they issue opinions on ethics questions. They ensure our compliance with state law, very important. There are some time frame concerns that we'd like to talk with them about in terms of issuing opinions. But again, all of this is post-appointment. So what we're looking to all of you tonight is basically a thumbs up on revising the code to make some minor adjustments for these, but basically full speed ahead. Police Pension Advisory Board, only 2 are city residents, and we'll be recommending that the term limits and the term periods and term limits apply to them. And on Tree Commission, post-appointment, we want to ask the group to look at the issue of education and advocacy, which has come up a few times recently with the Tree Commission. So that in a nutshell is what we're hoping to do to get blessing for tonight on these 5. We'll talk about the other 3, and then we'll double back and see who's got comments from the rest of you, open it up for discussion. And then if we have time, I'll come back and talk about the next set of committees, the standing committees that don't have regulatory authority, but one thing at a time. So next slide, please. And I think this is Councilmember Searcy's time.
Perfect. So as Councilmember Dabala mentioned, there were 3 boards that we wanted to take very case-specific approach to addressing. So the first is the Personnel Appeals Board. And what they do is they hear appeals of non-union city staff. So that board has not met. No cases have been heard. No residents are appointed. And so what we would recommend is removing this particular board from the list of our standing committees, but to create an alternative appeals process and working with Tracy through like our HR processes. So that's what we recommend there. The Facade Advisory Board, what they do is they advise on commercial facade designs in the historic district. The Facade Advisory Board actually wrote a letter and made a recommendation that their formal review role is no longer needed. And that formal review actually is what makes them, air quotes, quasi-judicial, in that they actually approve something, they review something. And so what we are proposing that we do is review the Facade Advisory Board's role along with some of the other standing committees that are not quasi-judicial in nature, because we believe that there are some aspects of what they are proposing to do we might want to take into consideration in terms of other committees that currently exist or future recommendations that may come from an entity like the Public Safety Task Force, or how we may want to deal with other facade efforts. So that's what we're recommending there. The Noise Control Board hears two-party noise complaints and advises on noise issues. What they do is review the regulatory, so they hear these two-party noise complaints, and they do it more, they serve, based on what we heard, a bit of a mediation role, so to speak. And so some of the issues are, we do need to review their regulatory role within a context of, and I apologize because I had mentioned Public Safety Task Force because I just have Public Safety Task Force on the brain, forgive me, with the Facade Advisory Board, but that is not correct. That board we wanted to consider because they did mention things like, for example, doing things that are outside of maybe the historic area, maybe some weird overlap that may potentially happen with the creation of something like economic development or broader facade activities. So that's what they proposed in their letter that we would need to consider. The Noise Board, on the other hand, what we would want to do is review their regulatory role within the broader context of discussions on code enforcement and public safety. So, noise is just one issue, but there may be other issues that might require, in terms of code enforcement, that might require neighbor to neighbor mediation. And we were just wondering whether or not we want to review the purpose and perhaps make it broader. And so one thought is to seek Public Safety Task Force input. There's been 5 two-party complaints since 2017. And so we might also want to consider the purpose further, such as the educational role. And what we could do is reappoint the current members while additional review continues. Keeping in mind, if we are talking about aspects of perhaps incorporating the Public Safety Task Force recommendations that aren't scheduled to come forward until June, just in the interest of time, it might make sense for us to just reappoint the current members, and that will buy us a little bit more time to really do a deeper flush into the role of this particular board. So I apologize for misspeaking earlier, but in essence, we have 3 boards. The first we're not using and we can incorporate into other HR processes, and that's the Personnel Appeals Board. The second, the Facade Advisory Board, and they wrote a letter to us asking to remove their approval portion, which we think is important to consider them along with the other standing committees that don't have any kind of regulatory role. And then the last is the Noise Control Board. And the question is whether or not we want to see how recommendations from like the Public Safety Task Force might be used to inform the purpose of this particular board. And so, all right. So one of the things that was also, that we also talked about before was the whole structure of the committees. And when we're talking about structure, we're talking about the number of members as well as the term limits that they have. And so one of the recommendations that we had received previously was to try to get everyone onto a common structure. And so what we did was we took a look at what each board, commission currently has in terms of what's written into code in terms of their membership number and term limits, and then made recommendations on what we would suggest specifically as it may relate to how we might be able to introduce a common structure. So just to remind folks, the Board of Elections currently has up to 7 members. And then currently they serve 3-year terms and there are no term limits. And so what we recommend is a common structure with an exception to allow 3 terms, not 2, for election consistency. And so the next is CULTA. Right now, CULTA has 7 to anywhere from 7 to 11 members, where up to 4 can be non-residents. They currently have a 3-year term and there are no term limits. And what we propose is to use a common structure for this particular committee as well, and to consider the role of non-resident property owners as members. And then the next is the Ethics Commission. They have up to 7 current members and 3 years in terms of their terms, and we're recommending the common structure for them. The Police Pension Advisory Board, 2 residents. There's only 2 residents on that board, and just as a reminder, that function is a little bit more actuarial in nature. And so we have 2 residents that are awesome and taking on that task. And so there are 2 residents that are part of that 7 and part of 7 members. There are no terms or term limits. So what we're suggesting is that there's the common structure, which would put into place terms and term limits into the term lengths and term limits into for the Police Pension Advisory Board. Keep in mind that this may be one that will be tricky for recruitment going forward, but we still think that it's important for us to make sure that we're kind of having some consistency there. The next is the Tree Commission. The Tree Commission currently has 5 members. The current terms are 3-year terms, and there are no term limits. And again, we're recommending the common structure here. And then the Noise Control Board has 5 to 7 residents and 3-year terms with no term limits. And again, we're recommending that we extend the current appointments while additional review continues. And just as a reminder for everyone, the common structure that was presented to us by the subgroup before is 7 to 9 members, 2 to 3-year terms with a 2-term limit, and that we have deference towards resident members and we take exceptions as needed. So as you can see, with the 2 to 9 members, the vast majority of our current number of members for the various boards fall pretty close within that range. There are a couple that we would need to do some additional recruitment for, but in terms of changes that might need to be made to the code, there may not be many, because most still fall within that range. In terms of term lengths and term limits, there are a couple of places where we would need to make changes. So as you can see, a number of our current committees don't have term limits, so we would need to write those into code. In terms of the lengths, I think there's only the Police Pension Board that doesn't have a term length, but the others fall within that 2 to 3 year period, so that's not that big of a change. And again, the deference to resident members, and one place where that will be a point for us to discuss is as it relates to COLTA. So again, COLTA also includes property owners, and so they may be non-residents. And so is there any concern about or preference towards making sure that we can continue to have non-resident property owners serve on COLTA or not?
Councilmember Siemens has his hand up. I don't know if you want comments now or to wait.
Councilmember Dabala, are you speaking?
I am trying to say something.
No worries.
Sorry. Yeah, this is a great place to just take a look at the overall picture of what we're recommending and then discuss it.
Okay.
So in short, retaining back where we were there, Talisha. One more slide. No, I'm sorry, forward.
Oh. This one?
No, the next one, please.
There you go.
Yeah, so retain 5 groups and make some structural changes. Discontinue the 1 group. Reconsider the focus of the Facade Advisory Board, assuming discontinue the regulatory piece and then consider it with the other standing committees. On the Noise Control Board, as you just heard, we consider it within the broader context. if the slides are up, I won't be able to see hands, so I'll rely on the mayor to call out who wants to discuss. But Councilmember Siemens?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'll just be quick as we went down through this. On the COLTA, I think it's very appropriate to allow for landlords or property owners outside of the city, since they have no more or less interest in the topic than those who actually reside in the city, those landlords who reside in the city. So I think it's appropriate for that one committee. And this is something I normally, I feel strongly that we should include city residents or require residency for all committees to the extent possible or feasible. I understand there's a difference with the police pension board because of the technical requirements, technical skills that we might be looking for on that. And then that was my next question is, Councilmember Searcy mentioned it as she was giving her presentation. It seems that maybe a term limit on that may be counterproductive. Might have to be some exception to that board. And my last comment was on the Personnel Appeals Board. I understand that something's been in my life on the council has been used very, very seldom, I think but once. As such, it's something you can't have a standing committee for, sits there and does nothing for, 15 years and then you ask them to do one thing. But on the other side, the alternative is hard to imagine. It would take some thought because, the real concern here from the council was that, to disinvolve city staff in these appeals. When it gets to this point, it's already gone through a number of staff reviews. And it's, how do we come up with an alternative that allows for kind of an outside review of the complaint and a little bit less or a little bit more independent decision. And that's it. Thank you. And thank you for all three of you for the great amount of work I know you've put into this and the thought. Thank you.
Well, Councilmember Siemens, you said that's it, but that was a lot.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. So a couple of things. On COLTA, our idea was not to was not to change it right now, but to kick it back to the committee and ask them to tell us what they think. That would be an area that they would want to kick around themselves a little bit. So we weren't trying to say that we definitely want to decide ourselves right now.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that that's the committee's role for that.
Okay.
I think in fairness that, if you own a building in Tacoma Park that is a rental property, that you should be able to have a voice at this level.
Okay, I think somebody else said that last week, but I'm having a little trouble remembering who. So maybe, okay. On the personnel appeals, I am gonna kick that to the city manager. I am under the impression that there isn't currently a firm policy about levels of staff review, and that so what you said that there was, before it gets to the appeals board, there's all these levels of staff review. That's exactly what I'm not clear we have, and what I thought we were going to try to substitute for the personnel appeals board. But I'm going to ask the city manager if she can address that further.
Sure, there's not a standard process. So I think there's the normal kind of thing that you would imagine, which is you first go to your supervisor and then you go to the department head, and it could eventually come to the deputy city manager or myself for resolution of an issue. But one of the things that we have, for example, with through the unions is a grievance process that you kind of put a different hat on and you kind of go through a hearing process and you identify and write that up in a more formal way. So that could be an option. Another option could be that there would be something that's very specific through the Human Resources Department. There's some, innovative other options, which I'd love to talk to staff about. One is that we could have a partnership with another municipality where you kind of, help each other out. So it's a little bit of an outside ear. And another option is that there could be some kind of council advisory role of somewhere in there. So I think there's a variety of options for that. But I don't know exactly what might make the most sense. All of which I think anything that's written down would be useful because right now there's nothing that's really written. And so I think that would be a great step forward. I also have some comments about the police pension board when you get to that point.
One question I have for Councilmember Siemens, in terms of the Personnel Appeals Board, would you be amendable with us discontinuing the group with the caveat that we give staff an allotted amount of time to develop an alternative process?
Yeah, my whole issue on this point is strictly that, staff shouldn't be policing staff. And so if it gets down to this point where there is, and like I say, it's something that is so infrequent. And I think that I'm serious. I think there was one case where this happened in the last 20 years. So, but I think there has to be when things are that contentious that someone's that upset that they ought to have a place to go that doesn't rely on the person they're complaining about or the organization they're complaining about.
So it sounds to me like a combination of clearly writing down the process, the internal process that we have now that mimics what unionized staff have available to them, plus some way of ensuring a fresh set of eyes, someone outside that person's chain, whether it be in our department, in our city management, or in our city council, or in a partnership with another city. Those two steps together, if we ask for those to be developed within a certain time, rather than keep a board on the books that essentially doesn't exist. If someone asked tomorrow to use the Personnel Appeals Board, that would in practice not be possible. And so that seems a little awkward too.
Definitely.
I just want to add that the fact that we have it, but we don't have anyone sitting there and we don't have a process concerns me. So I would love to have this be figured out sooner rather than later, because we also don't want to be in a situation where we have an appeal and then we have to figure out the process. So I'm just curious if we can get a sense maybe of how long you anticipate it would take to come up with this and how complicated that is or isn't. And maybe as we're looking at that, we can then incorporate that into our work on this. And if there are changes to be made to the code or other things, we can incorporate those in as well.
I haven't had a recent discussion with staff, so I just would need to check in with them. My guess is that the actual option wouldn't take long for us to come up with, but it would fall into the category of having to go through the city attorney.
I mentioned one thing on that as well. I'm not sure if we're raising hands, but I know in the context of the code of conduct for the committees, which is still something that we have to get to, there was talk about asking the Ethics Commission to do that. And I know there were questions about whether they had the bandwidth and so on to be involved in that. But I wonder whether, if we go that route, whether the Ethics Commission could play a role in, it sounds like they'd be quite infrequent, the number of cases that would otherwise have been and to the personnel board. At least the ethics committee exists. So it's one other thought.
That seems to me to be a bit far from the Ethics Commission's central core charge, because a personnel appeal could be on anything and it might have nothing to do with ethics. Whereas at least the code of conduct is about ethics. So I'm gonna recommend that we do what I said a couple minutes ago, that we ask the city manager for those two parts, that we to write down the current internal procedure and identify what the outside review would be, and if that, and ask for that at the same time to come back as soon as possible so that we can take this off the books if we're comfortable with the solution. And in the meantime, not try to recruit or appoint anybody for it.
There are no hands at the moment, just FYI.
Well,
Okay.
I believe
Oh,
the
wait.
city manager.
I'm sorry, are we just doing general discussion about these ideas, or was there something more specific? I don't want to.
I know, did the city manager want to say something? Because I thought I heard her voice.
I thought you were
think the police
soliciting
pension
hands.
board. Yes, I just wanted to describe what the police pension board is for those who are listening, because I think it's people are a little confused. It is a group of representatives it's got the finance director, it's got myself, it has representatives from the police department and the police union, as well as the two residents who are appointed by the council. And so it's a very, and the HR director all meet on this regular basis. And so when we talk about how many members or whatever, each of the various persons on there, other than the two residents, are there for their very specific role, like finance director or the local 400 representative, a person who's at a certain level in the police and a person who's a different level in the police. So it's very specific for those. But the two residents, they are wonderful, who are on the police pension board. I do think it does make sense to have an opportunity for there to be some turnover. They're not going to be there forever, as much as we appreciate them. And so thinking about a way to have some regular turnover and so that there's training of them coming on board and becoming familiar with a fairly sophisticated level of knowledge is required for the role. And so, making sure that there's at least a staggering as best as possible of those members over time so that they can really play that strong role. I don't think any indication that they would not be residents. Tacoma Park has managed to have very knowledgeable residents for this committee. So I don't think that needs to be an issue, but I just wanted to kind of clarify for people that this is something that's a very specific role to manage the pension fund for the police department.
So yes, the recommendation is that they still be residents and that the terms still be staggered. That's for everybody, not just for the Personal Appeals Board. And there is, as I understand it from HR, there is training already for everybody on the board in the fiduciary, both in the details of the fund, but in also how you do the work, how you manage, how you think about managing a fund, et cetera. So that's one place where committee-specific training already exists and in pretty great depth, apparently. So that someone who's interested and knowledgeable in the field could probably handle it. wouldn't have to be a retired actuary in order to fulfill the role as a resident.
Right. I think one of the points that Councilmember Searcy made, which I think does have some validity, is just, and this may be as the city attorney kind of writes some of the code, that there may be some time when you really need their terms have expired, but you really need them to stay on until you can find the appropriate person. So just does it take for the council to make an exception to continue a person for a little bit longer? So that's the only thing that I would imagine for this particular board that may come into play.
So that's not just this board, as far as I'm concerned. So
No, that's right. That's right.
Attorney. So if we have term limits, what does it take to have a special exception for an individual who may be useful for particular, there may be particular circumstances. Okay.
But I think it's just not, one of the issues with the police pension board is that because there's only 2 resident members, that, you could easily not have any. And so at least with other boards, there's more people.
I haven't heard anybody say that they wanted more residents on this, though.
No,
So
I think the
that's not one
issue.
of the, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, and definitely city manager, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the question of, and I don't think that you're saying that, you have 2 individuals, because we're basically synchronizing everyone, right? So if we're bringing everyone on in, June, right? Everyone's starting anew, and we're giving everyone, for the most part, this common structure. That means they will both hit their term limits at the same time. And with only 2, you stand the chance, because of the nuance of this particular board, finding yourself in a situation where you lose one, it's going to be hard, but both of them hit their term limits at the same time because you brought them on at the same time, then you have no one, and it's a little harder to recruit. So for the police pension board, is the common structure appropriate? Right? Is the 2 3-year terms, does that work?
The recommendation on the common structure was to stagger the terms. Now that gets a little tricky when there's only 2 terms to stagger instead of 7 or 9. Yeah. But the idea wasn't to appoint everybody and then they all disappear the exact same year, if I understood them correctly.
When we're thinking about the implementation, then
yeah,
and that's where things are going to get tricky. We've ended everyone's term come June 30th, and we're basically starting everyone anew. Right? Logistically, that's what we've set ourselves up to do. So if the idea is that we're going to stagger, then we would need to just think through how to do that. Maybe it's if you are reappointing people that currently serve, you reappoint them based on the time that they've already served. So then you have that built in, but that's another conversation for another day. I guess my question still is that, is that 2-3-year terms, like is having an individual for 6 years, if they decide to do those back to back, is that sufficient for the police pension board?
I think it is. In starting out, you might do one for 6 and the other for 9, or some other thing, for the very beginning, although I don't know that somebody necessarily wants to commit themselves to 9 years. So you might do a 3 years and a 6. So I think it may be a discussion with the board too, or the members. They may have some ideas about what makes more sense than what might work.
Yeah, the reality is, I think that the 2 that are there now would return. And so then it would be, as you say, staggering based on time already served. If that makes any sense.
I just think it's a conversation probably offline that we can work.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back here to the others on this list of 5. So Councilmember Siemens had picked out the Police Pension Board and COLTA and about in terms of the rules about membership. Does anybody have any other comments about the first 5 in terms of the common structure for membership, for terms, before we get to the second 3, to the second column?
I'm fine with what you're recommending. I'm good.
Okay, anybody else?
Councilmember Kovar.
Yes, thanks. Just a few thoughts on the common structure as it would apply to those 5. And these aren't demands at all, just questions that I have. And you can answer them at the end, or just say we thought about that and we decided not to do it. I think one of the questions I had is that if it's 7 to 9 members, so say it's 7, it's pretty common that there are vacancies. And so I worry just a little bit about whether they have quorums when we need them to have quorums. I remember there was an incident not that long ago, not an incident, but a situation where the tree commission had just the right number of people, and they could have been unable to take their official type of quasi-judicial action. So my only question is 7 to 9, does that seem enough? Can we keep up with the appointments to ensure that there's a quorum? So that's one question I have. I do think the staggered terms is important so that you don't have a situation where on a given date, everybody disappears and then you don't have sort of some holdover knowledge, and whether that's based on how much time served already for reappointees or just drawing up lots for first-time people. But when the U.S. Senate started out, some senators had to get shorter terms at the beginning because they were going to end up being staggered. So I assume we can do that. One other question I had was whether 2 terms is the right amount. And I guess it partly depends on how long the terms are for, but we want people to develop a certain level of expertise, but then rotate out so that fresh thoughts and perspectives can come in. And the question is, if it was 2 2-year terms, does that give people enough time? I'm not saying that it doesn't. I'm just curious about that. And then the last thing I would say is some of you didn't really mention it here, but I think I've said it before, some of the committees have special designated members on them. So for example, the COLT, I think, has certain spots that are reserved for renters and reserved for landlords. And if I remember correctly, I think the Environment Committee had certain categories that are reserved. I think that's helpful as long as it's not a straitjacket, but I wondered whether that's something that had been looked at, not specifically on certain committees, but whether we would still retain that kind of thing where we say on committee X, we're holding 2 spots for this type of person or a person representing this organization or whatever it might be. So just some thoughts on the common structure. I have a separate comment about the middle group, but I'll hold off on that for now.
For me, taking the last one first, as I understood it, the common structure was intended to, for the most part, eliminate all these special designated members, 2 from column A, 1 from column B, unless there's a clear need for it. So in the case of COLTA, we're saying there's a need for it, and it needs to be looked at. And as Councilmember Siemens said, that there's good reasons to retain the membership structure that is outlined for COLTA. So on the 6 years, the right length, nothing is the right length. I mean, there's always, no matter whether you pick 4 years or 6 years or 8 years, there'll be turnover and they'll be staggering. So I would hope we could talk with the city attorney about how other communities do the staggered terms. There must be some way that somebody's already figured out how to do
Right,
this. We
right.
can adopt that makes some sense. And the common structure that was recommended says you can step down for a year and then you come back and you can get back in the loop if you want. And some of the committees that have bylaws have that already. And if you remember back on that slide, 6 years, whether it was 2 3-year terms or 3 2-year terms, was already a fairly common number. And on the first one, on the tree commission, they do have 5 people now. There was I had some discussion with them about going to 7, and there is some nervousness about recruitment. The thinking goes that if it's recruitment as part of a broad effort to reach all of the different kinds of residents we have, and if it's not just, oh, we have an opening on the tree commission, who cares about trees, that we may meet with better success in attracting a range of people who are concerned about trees from a safety point of view, from an environmental health point of view, not just from a canopy point of view. So that's the thought there, in discussion with the tree commission members that I had.
I think also one of the things that we had talked about is to help us avoid not having enough members was the shifting to, what was it, like 2 times a year, like grouping when we're recruiting for.
Right.
Because one of the problems is that we do it and I don't mean this negative on anybody, but like in a haphazard way. Like we're constantly recruiting and having people, and we lose track of it because we have way too many committees. And so it happens that then all of a sudden somebody rotates off, they're term limited. That is one of the reasons why we want to move to a common structure, so that we can reduce the chance that all of a sudden we find ourselves with not enough members of a tree commission or something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I agree with that point, and by having the term limits, it does allow you way more time to recruit, especially whether or not someone chooses to cycle off. I was surprised at the number of committees that we have that did not have term limits, right? So then it's up to that person's discretion as to when we need to recruit. By having term limits, you know, well in a year in advance that people are nearing the end of their commitment time. It gives us a lot more time to recruit.
I also just want to add, with regard to the specific spots, specific people with specific characteristics, like a landlord or a tenant, for different committees. I think there might be some, like COLTA, where we do actually need to spell that out in the code, and there might be others where we do more of that in our own recruiting materials, and it's not actually a part of the code, but it's something we're thinking about as we think through recruiting and selection of the members that we appoint to the committees, to make sure we have a broad representation on each of them.
Yeah, and I think to some extent, it's more relevant potentially not in these committees, with the exception of COLTA, but perhaps in some of the other ones where at least we ensure that we have a range of backgrounds, right? So that you don't have all people on the other committees with the same type of background. So we don't have to talk about that this evening, because I think that's more relevant to the future policy committees that we're going to get to eventually tonight or a future night, right?
Yes. All right. So does again, I can't see hands. Are there other comments on the first 5? While you're thinking about if you have comments and the mayor's looking. Okay, so to restate, Board of Elections, COLTA, Ethics Commission, Police Pension Board, and Tree Commission, retain them pretty much as is. For each of them, there's specific questions we are asking the group to follow up on once they are appointed / reappointed. to have, with the exception of the Board of Elections, to have the common structure. Yeah, let me do it this way. The common structure of 7 to 9 members, 2 3-year terms, a total of 6 years, and then a year off, then you can get back in rotation, with the exceptions of the Board of Elections that specifically asked for 3 3-year terms because of the complexity of managing, of implementing a successful election. You don't get to do it every year, so you can't learn fast enough. And the exception of CULTA, which already has categories in law. And so looking at asking the group to look at not just the non-resident issue, but the whole package of issues, not issues, of different types of membership for CULTA. Again, appointing and or reappointing, mission as defined, meets the purposes that we outlined earlier, meets the criteria, the factors that we reviewed them on. So these guys are good to go with these specific questions fed back to them when they are appointed, reappointed, and with these 2 membership exceptions, CULTA and Board of Elections. That sound clear enough? And is everybody okay with that? In which case we will ask.
Yep, we're good.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Susie, do you want to back it up? You want to back
Yeah,
up?
back it up, 'cause
We still have 3
Councilmember
more to
Kovar
go.
wants to talk about facade advisory board.
Yeah, so we talked about Personnel's Appeals Board. Are we all agreed that we would like to do, as I said, let me describe it again. So Personnel Appeals Board, discontinue it in code and ask the city attorney to prepare code materials that we would vote on about to do that. In the meantime, ask the city manager to tell us about to tell us how long it will take to write down the current internal policies, step 1, step 2, step 3, your boss's boss, your whatever, and what the outside review would look like, so that by the time we get the code revisions back and we're about to vote on them or not, we will know what that's going to look like. So is everyone's good with that?
Mm-hmm. Doesn't have to be everyone, just has to be 4 of us. Keep
All
going.
right. Speak now.
All right, you're good. You're good. It's got to be easy, 4 of us.
And before I get to the Facade Advisory Board and the Noise Control Board, I think we forgot again to say one very important thing. There are a lot of hardworking residents on all of these committees, and all of this discussion about the purpose of the committee and the membership and all is no reflection whatsoever on the folks who are on them now, because people have just universally been doing a bang up job. And we just want to acknowledge that. That's very important to say. So when we get to Facade and Noise Control Board, on Facade Advisory Board, again, to repeat, 2-part shuffle. Part 1, taking the letter that they sent us about what they see as changes they envision for the purpose of that board, that we agree with them that the regulatory piece be discontinued, and that we return to the other questions that they've raised when we talk about the other standing groups, and we see, do we have a priority that we want a historic committee of some sort? Do we have a priority that we want an economic development committee of some sort, etc.?
Right.
So rather than try to settle that now, just the part we want to settle right now is discontinue the regulatory piece and move them to the further discussion. So I think there may be some discussion on this one.
I'm good with it. I appreciate the facade board. I appreciate that letter. And I think reimagining them and since something else is appropriate. Councilmember Kovar.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I mean, I see already that there are 4 people who support it, which is fine, but just a few thoughts that I had. So it seems to me the options are either to get rid of it, to keep it the way it is, or to do something along the lines of what they said in the letter. And I know what the working group is suggesting is that we don't have to resolve all of those things today, and I appreciate that. I do think that broadening their mandate more widely outside the historic district, I don't really see how that would work and make it an optional or voluntary thing. It's a lot of work for a small business person to get started, and I think telling them that they have to go to the county and go to historic preservation potentially, and go to these other kinds of approvals they have to get from WSSC and everybody else, and oh, by the way, there's this other one you can do too, which is voluntary. Well, they're not going to do it, and I think that's, if it's voluntary, there's really no point in it. I think that I'd like to have a clearer idea of what, for example, the Historic Preservation Commission itself thinks of the letters that they get from the Facade Board, and what, for example, the Old Tacoma Business Association thinks about what they provide. If there's a sense that everything that they do doesn't have a significant value added component, I could understand us saying that we wanted to move on from it. I just don't feel like I know enough about that to be able, for myself, to be able to make that, to be able to make that decision at this point.
I'm gonna ask my colleagues who did more of the work on this board than I did more of the interviewing and talking to various parties to respond on this one.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about what I've heard just in some of my conversations. I think, I mean, I guess to me, part of the importance of removing that regulatory part is exactly what you talked about, which was the concern about the extra layer of challenge it puts on businesses trying to make changes. And then I think we do need to look at what the role of the board would be if it does not have that regulatory role. And I think that should be done if it doesn't have a regulatory role within kind of the context of those other committees, as we said, because those committees are playing more of an advisory role, not to, in this case, not directly to the businesses like they are doing now, but more to the council, and more to what our policies are and things like that. You know, there might be some look we want to take at a body that doesn't just look at facade, but maybe looks at, you know, sort of how we do things like commemoration. I know the Commemoration Commission already does that, and maybe there's some merging of those two concepts. You know, there's some similarities, there's some differences. Maybe looking at you know, history more broadly in the city, trying to broaden out our sense of history and how we talk about it and why it's important historically and looking forward. And you know, making it not just about facades, but about people's stories and the experiences of people in Tacoma Park and beyond. And I'm not sure if that is something that, you know, makes sense as a city committee or not. It's clearly something that's an important thing for us all to be thinking about and considering. But sort of based on my understanding of the role that the Facade Advisory Board has been taking, it seems to me that broadening out that the concept and removing the regulatory aspect are things we should be looking at, and we can kind of consider what other facets we might want to explore in the, you know, in the consideration what we do with those other committees that are kind of serving similar purposes.
From my perspective, kind of having a committee like this offering advice when there are several business associations that already exist here in the city, and we've talked about trying to find a way to pull businesses that fall outside those two geographical areas, either into their own or in some other way, to get them to coordinate or collaborate better with OTBA and with CDA. It's just difficult for me to sort of imagine what a group like this would do in terms of providing advice to other businesses around the city. I just don't really see the point of it. So to me, either they do the historic district kind of work with Historic Preservation Commission, or, then I'm not sure it makes sense for that to continue. But I'm just not persuaded. I'm not violently against it. I'm just not persuaded that there's a clear case for why what they're doing should be stopped unless Historic Preservation Commission says we don't think it's helpful at all, or Old Town Business Association finds it to be a harmful thing to the work that they do. So that's where I am. I won't repeat it a third time, but that's the piece of it that I'm just not seeing right now.
Yeah. And I think, Councilmember Kovar, that is a very, very, very valid concern. I think one of the things that we were trying to do is make sure that we have that conversation, and the conversation that we're having now, but have it in context with the discussions around the other standing committees. And I think one of the things that will be really important as we're having those conversations about these other committees, as we review, the charge, as well as go through the process of the criteria review, some of the things that you're mentioning now will be really pressing. And we may say, you know what, the Facade Advisory Board isn't something that we necessarily want to keep. Maybe there are certain aspects of those functions, as Councilmember Kostick mentioned, that we may want to incorporate into another committee. Maybe we raise the question of the commemoration committee and how does it relate to other things. Maybe we decide to do something that's more of a task force. But those are some of the discussions that we'll have when we start talking about the other non-quasi judicial committees. So I hear you and raise some very similar concerns. But I think we can have that larger discussion when we're talking through, because I think it's helpful contextually when we're talking through those other committees, if that's helpful at all.
All right, that's fine. I just don't think I've heard a compelling case for why the regulatory thing has to go. Maybe it does, but I haven't really heard that. So.
Oh, so that's your question. Okay, so we did hear.
Yeah.
And definitely Councilmember Kostick, correct me if I'm wrong at all. But one of the points that was raised was that to some degree, the role was duplicative of what the county already requires. So in some instances, you had the residents that were making a decision on, let's say, awning, that then the business owner would have to turn around and then send that same information forward to the county. So it's basically somewhat double work. And it's my understanding that the county requirements for facade in the historic district clearly aligns. And I believe, and definitely Councilmember Costa, because you talked to more people than I did, correct me if I'm wrong, but the facade board and what we had put in place kind of predated all of the things that are now in place with the county. So it really is that approval process is somewhat of, it's duplicative to some degree. And so definitely I'll be quiet and let Councilmember Kostick speak to it.
I am by no means an expert, and I do not know whether it predated it or not. But that is what we have heard, is a sense that the businesses, it's sort of another hurdle potentially for businesses to go through as they're doing this process, and that to some extent, a lot of times they may just sort of pay their if they're doing something more than just a sign, let's say, they may, pay their architect or whoever they're working with to kind of go through and work with the board. And then it's not necessarily this sort of community building education, sort of experience that we might envision, where there's some collaboration and cooperation in terms of what the businesses look like and kind of coordination across those. It becomes more of just sort of something they pay the person to do, they do their job. It's sort of just another expense that our small businesses have to do when they're struggling already, rather than something that really kind of achieves maybe the goals of it, which are a little more, I think, community focused. And that maybe, to me, it seems like some of those could maybe be achieved better through the business associations where they have some of those connections and
All
where
right,
they
I'll
might
think-
coordinate with other businesses.
I'll think more about it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so with the exception of Councilmember Kovar, it sounds like we are going to move ahead with the request the city attorney to come up to do code changes to change the regulatory part of this portion of the facade advisory board.
Councilmember DeBala?
Yes.
I would actually suggest that we don't have the city attorney move forward with any code changes to the facade advisory board until after we have the more holistic discussion.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, cancel that thought about the city attorney. We're giving him enough to do with the other things. So then we have one left in this batch, noise control board. And again, to summarize, the recommendation is to consider the noise control board, which again, to refresh, does essentially two-party mediation, without calling it that technically, between parties who are having noise issues, but has not had a lot of business, and the business has all been the commercial residential interface over the cases of the last few years. So reconsider that within the broader context of the public safety discussions generally about noise, about code enforcement, and about whether two-party discussions with you facilitated by a resident board are useful not just for noise, but for some other kinds of code violations as one way to resolve them. And so our recommendation is not to business as usual, retain them, move ahead, appoint new members, recruit new members, but to simply reappoint the current set of members and ask them and ask the Public Safety Task Force to take a look at these broader issues. And we have talked with noise control board members. We've talked with the staff that work with them in coming up with this suggestion. Discussion. Remember, I can't see hands, so you just have to chime in.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Yep, no hands. And we're good with that recommendation.
Okay, so that is the first 8 of 17. We're doing well. And I think we've gotten our direction from you as to how to proceed on them. So we can move to the next slide, please. So the next thing up, next slide, please, Talisha. Thank you. The next task is to look at the standing committees. The facade board isn't on this list because I didn't know what we were going to decide. But what we will do is go back to those priorities and factors, go back to the purposes that we looked at in the beginning and all agreed on, and apply them to what the code says about these particular committees. We will consult with staff, consult with individual committee members, both existing and past, go back and look at the surveys that got done last summer, and think about the structural issues, the implications of the standing structure on the operation of some of these committees. Next slide, please. So just to give you something to think about, on the next, we have to just run through quickly where we are with these committees. So we have an Arts and Humanities Commission. They advise us on how to serve the public best on arts. They encourage participation by residents, coordination among groups. They facilitate employment opportunities. This is what's in the code. So one question is, are these the purposes that we want? Membership, they are up to 11 to 15, including non-residents, and 2 3-year terms. The Commemoration Commission is charged with a whole bunch of different activities around commemorations, memorials, and recognitions of individuals and groups in the city. They have 5 to 9 voting members and 4 non-voting members, and no term limits. The Complete Safe Streets Committee, which is relatively new, and we've heard from very recently, advise on transportation related issues broadly, encourage alternatives to driving. That's what's in the code. Up to 11 members, 3 2-year terms. Committee on the Environment is on this list because it is in the code. Advise on all environmental issues, and then it lists 6 or 8. And partner on on achieving environmental certifications for the city. 11 to 15 members, various categories are spelled out of membership, various categories of membership, sorry. 3 2-year terms. So you'll see it's kind of all over the board here. Emergency preparedness, give input and assist with emergency operations planning and preparation, and help involve residents in assisting where that's useful. 7 residents plus 4 representatives of different city and outside agencies, plus 5 others as assigned. 3-year terms, no term limits. Grants Review Committee is not codified. It's only a resolution. So that might be the first thing that we want to do if we decide that this is still a priority. Evaluates grant applications, recommends awards to us. Up to 9 members, 2 3-year terms. Next slide, please. Nuclear Free Committee oversees the nuclear free zone portions of the city code in terms of purchasing and other requirements. 7 members, 2-year terms, no term limits. Recreation Committee, advising on recreation programs and facilities. 7 to 15 members, 2-year terms, no term limits. Youth Council, active participation in city government system, and helps the council to address youth issues. 11 members, and of course, in that case, there's a very clear reason for an exception to the terms, and they have 1-year terms. Every year, the entire body is reappointed. So as I said, that's quite a range of purposes, quite a range of memberships and requirements. And something that's implicit in all of this that we have not talked about, but I'll just put out there for you to think about, is the role of the council in clearly giving direction to committees. That was recommended, one of the recommendations, and one of the recommendations to do it regularly. So we, as 3 of us, had talked about the idea that a priority setting time is a good time to check in with direction to committees so that it's built into the council schedule, and committees don't wind up in a situation, as several of these have been, of they start out strong, it's clear what they're doing, they do that, and then they're left with this overly broad charge and not really clear where to go next. So that's something to think about and talk about next time. So that's just a little preview of what's coming up. Do either council member Circe or Kostiuk have anything to say about this set of standing committees at this point?
Nope.
Nope. Yeah, just a
Very
teaser.
well.
Just a little.
I'm sorry, I have a question when you're talking to the city attorney, because I know the youth council and the grants review committee are not codified. They're just resolutions. Is
Right.
there a reason, and we don't have to answer it tonight, but like that we put the committees in these committees in code? I kind of understand why the other committees that we talked about before that have a what's the pseudo judicial role,
Right.
we may want to put that in the code, but just anyway, that's just something to think about, like, because then every time we make a change or something that we may want to change the
Right.
purpose, you got to change the code.
Yeah,
Right?
well,
So
that's a good question. Okay, on the list for the city attorney.
yeah, so like if we do it by resolution and we want to change the purpose or what were the objectives, we can do that by another resolution. So I just thought about that tonight when I was paying attention. I'm tired, but I was paying attention.
Yeah, maybe it's a good thing we're not going super late tonight.
Yeah, this is super late. I'm done.
So if there's no other comments or questions about this, thank you all for your patience with us and your attention to what we've been discussing, and for the input tonight, and to just wrap up where we're going with all of this. So we're still, I'm sorry to say, we're still on block 1, committee purposes, charges, and structure. But we are on step 3. And then we are very close to the time when we'll have code change discussions about administrative functions, training, reporting, some of those staff level questions that were recommended, staff level actions that were recommended by the group last summer. We were hoping to get a briefing on that from staff. So that should be coming up soon. And then looking at the code changes based on the purposes of the based on the committee decisions we make. And then last but certainly not least, discussion of recruitment and recruitment strategy. And this might be a good time to have a more general briefing there on the kinds of things that were brought up by the Recreation Center community engagement discussion, how community engagement works generally. And we can talk about that offline, but that might be a place where it would relate very closely to the kinds of conversations we're going to need to have about committees and how to recruit and how to reach all of our residents. And then new member appointments. I think that's it for us. Thank you so much.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again. This is a lot of work, and I think it's just, you present it, it's really easy to follow, and it's very complex. And so I think we're all just very appreciative of the work you're put into this and moving us forward on this. So that is the last thing we had on our agenda. Don't forget that you will we have a meeting on Monday night on the budget on capital projects, and then Wednesday night we'll have an admin session. And yes, Councilman Devala.
Question on budget. How do you want to handle questions from council members? Are we going to send them all by a certain date to a certain person? Are we going to do capital questions first? How do you want to do it to avoid chaos in my head?
Let me consult and get back, send out an email to you tomorrow. I think I know the answer, but before I say it, I want to make sure I don't throw somebody's workload completely out of the water. So I'll get back with you tomorrow. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Yeah, but the first discussion will be on capital purchases and projects. So.
Cool. Great. All right. Well, we are adjourned for the evening. We'll see you again next Monday night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.